A group of soldiers in the Republic of Niger say they have overthrown President Mohamed Bazoum. Speaking in a national TV broadcast, Colonel Major Amadou Adramane announced the closure of the country's borders. The group has also declared a nationwide curfew until further notice.
We, the Defense and Security Forces, meeting within the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, CLSP, have decided to put an end to the regime you know. This follows the continuing deterioration of the security situation and poor economic and social governance. Reaffirming our commitment to respecting all the commitments entered into by Niger, we reassure the national and international community that the physical and moral integrity of the authorities will be respected. In accordance with the principle of human rights, all the institutions of the Seventh Republic are suspended. The Secretaries General of the ministries will take care of day-to-day business. The Defense and Security Forces are managing the situation. All external partners are asked not to interfere. Land and air borders are closed until the situation has stabilized.
Il est demandé à tous les partenaires extérieurs de ne pas s'ingérer.
The U.S. has condemned efforts to subvert democratically elected government and demands the Nigerian leader's immediate release.
We are very closely monitoring the situation and developments in Niger. I spoke with President Bazoum earlier this morning and made clear that the United States resolutely supports him as the democratically elected president of Niger. We call for his immediate release. We condemn any effort to seize power by force. We're actively engaged with the Niger government, but also with partners in the region and around the world. We'll continue to do so until the situation is resolved appropriately and peacefully.
Also, a delegation from the West African regional bloc is heading to Niger. The decision emerged after a meeting with ECOWAS chair, President Bola Tinubu, and Benin Republic President Patrice Talon in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Niger's president has tweeted saying the hard-won achievements will be safeguarded. All Nigerians who love democracy and freedom will see to it. Big news coming in from Niger, updates there and condemnation from some world leaders.
A very sad one, I should say, because we had been watching this for a while, and it was only a couple of weeks ago that President Bola Tinubu did say we'll have no more coups on the West African continent, but now he's faced with his first one. What are we going to do? Is the ECOWAS going to treat this like the African Union has treated the rest? Because they've also blamed the reaction of the African Union and the ECOWAS hitherto coups, the ones we had in places like, we had coups in places like Mali with Tombabaye, and we had also in Guinea. Are we going to treat it that way? Are we going to keep negotiating with the coup plotters and say, okay, they should probably leave office at a point in time and have a transition back to democracy, which they never do, because the likes of Assimi Goïta have violated all of those transition timelines now. Tombabaye is quickly, putting his firm roots in there. Will they do that? Will they go with force, which might be tricky because of the situation and the collateral damage that will probably happen? The Americans are talking to Bazoum as we speak. He's a great friend of the West, the Americans and all of that. And he's been a key ally in fighting other terrorist group out of Niger and out of the West African sub-region, ISIS and the likes. So let's see how all of this pans out. But ECOWAS has sent in a delegation there. What will ECOWAS do? A lot of us have always called, for the good old days of ECOMOG to come back. But the question is, who is going to fund it? Nigeria does not have that capacity and that money any longer. Even when we had back in the days, ECOMOG was still really stretched, because even when it went in, it had its own challenges and all of that, internal challenges. So is it going to be a dialogue with the coup plotters in Niger? But this is another sad one for the ECOWAS sub-region, and the region that was thinking of being on a firm footing at this point in time. Truncating democratic rule in any country just ruins everything that people have ever fought for. And I understand, where President Bazoum is coming from. Let's see what delegation led by Patrice Talon will be able to do as regards that. Also, let's see what Americans are going to be able to do. Obviously, if Anthony Blinken said he spoke to Bazoum this morning, then definitely Bazoum is safe. We can assure his safety. Is it going to be a deal of how to get Bazoum out or how to get democracy out? A couple of options I see. The number one option will be probably have a transition phase where these military officers, get to return democratic power back. But that's also incumbent on their greed. If they don't get to greedy, that doesn't happen in the end, because we've seen how all of that has panned out in the end. A second option, which is always the hardest, is to be able to use force and restore power. But it's all up in the air because you don't know the backers of the coup plotters. So there are two case scenarios, probably one a better case scenario, but the other one a worst case scenario. We just hope for the best and we pray for Niger this morning. The
coup in Niger yesterday, as declared by Colonel Major Abdurrahman and the 9 other soldiers who appeared on television with him, representing different arms of the military in Niger, is the fourth since Niger gained independence from France in 1960. And it is a major setback for the democratic project in West Africa, particularly, considering the fact that within a short space of time, we have had coups in Mali, in Guinea, in Burkina Faso, and now in Niger, which is just a neighboring country, in the northern part of the country. It is also a violation of the will of the people of Niger, who had expected that democracy would bring them good tidings. What is the excuse of the coup plotters or the coup makers? They say deteriorating security situation in Niger and also bad governance. Now, if they talk about a deteriorating security situation, they're probably referring to the crisis in the southwest of the country coming from the Mali direction, the jihadist insurgents from Mali spilling into Niger. And also in the southeast of the country, which would be the Nigerian part of it, and the Islamic insurgents, the jihadists, also in that part, also affecting stability in Niger. What is clear is that, the future of Niger is uncertain. And this is why developments in that country are both unfortunate and disappointing. And it is just as well that President Tinubu, who is chairman of the authority of the heads of states and governments in West Africa, has immediately issued a statement that what is going on there is unpleasant. President Tinubu yesterday not only issued a statement, he met with President Patrice Talon of Republic of Benin, who has now gone to Niger to see how he can mediate. He has also, President Tinubu has also sent a Nigerian delegation, including former governor of Katsina State, Aminu Masari, the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of the National Intelligence Agency, NIA, and also Nigeria's Chief of Air Staff to go immediately and be on the ground. Now the coupists, they have closed all borders, they have shut down all institutions, they have suspended the Constitution in defiance of the resolution when President Tinubu emerged as the chairman of the Authority of Heads of State and Governments of ECOWAS in Guinea-Bissau. A major issue there was the need to protect the democratic project. When President Tinubu attended the African Union meeting in Nairobi, he reiterated the same point. And yesterday he said that Nigeria is committed to the promotion and defense of democracy, not just within Nigerian borders, but also, within the region. So this is a context of this development. Whatever the excuse of the coup makers may be, it is unjustifiable. The standard is that, look, the best way to have a change of government is through the ballot box and to respect the will of the people. What they have done, suspending the Constitution, closing down institutions, amounts to a violation of the constitutive acts, both of ECOWAS and also of the African Union. And we're not surprised that the international community, has also pledged support to President Bazoum. We saw Anthony Blinken saying that he called him. Blinken was in New Zealand when he made that phone call, The UN Secretary General has also called to express support. We hope, that the efforts of the international community and the interventions would help to stabilize Niger. What is the bigger threat? The bigger threat is that when they had their coup in Mali, in order to be able to hold down the power, the Malian coup makers, they resorted to recruiting the Wagner mercenaries. They went to Russia to help them out, and the place was taken over by Wagner mercenaries under the excuse that these Wagner mercenaries were helping to check the assault of the insurgents in that part of the country. Well, we know the problem that the Wagner mercenaries have created in Central African Republic, where they are also there, in Upper Mozambique, where they are also operating, in Sudan, where they are also operating, and now Niger. Putting these coups under pressure should be done in such a manner that they do not also recruit Wagner mercenaries to take over. And Nigeria has a special interest in this, not simply because President Tinubu is the chairman of the Authority of Heads States and Governments, but also because Niger is our neighboring country, which is one of the things that came out of the conversation between President Tinubu and President Talon yesterday. President Benin, Republic of Benin, in the northern part, shares borders with Niger. In Nigeria, in the northeastern part, shares borders with Niger. And, these countries are also part of the multinational joint task force to check terrorism and insurgency within the region. So crisis in Niger could have implications also, for crisis, particularly in the northern part of Nigeria. The coup in Niger stands condemned, and the international community must take a firm stand.
Absolutely. Now, this latest coup in Niger Republic has renewed unease about the state of democracies in West Africa and perhaps the rest of Africa, as we have for some season enjoyed stability, whereas when we had by 2012, we had over 200 coups and attempted coups on the continent. In fact, between 1960 and 1970, there was a coup in Africa every 55 days. And West Africa accounted for a large percentage of those coup or coup attempts. And so following that, it seemed as if we had gotten some form of stability, even though there were unrests in some parts of the continent. Now, when we study coups or we look at coups, it's important when we look at the Niger experience to understand the reason, or perhaps the reasons given by the coup plotters for the coup attempt. In this case, they talked about the state of government, they talked about bad leadership and the fact that they were moving away from that regime. Niger in particular has, as has already been established, has suffered a number of coups since 1960. And in 2021, when President Bazoum came into power, it seemed as if they were now going to enjoy the dividends of some form of democracies. But because if you look and study at African nations, the debate has been, do we truly practice democratic governance? And, we've had that talk a number of times. We have that talk frequently about countries on this continent and how we practice democracy, or perhaps a democracy that is better suited to our realities should be explored. Now, in terms of responses, we've talked about the responses from the United Nations, from the global sphere, and this is quite important. Very key is also the response from African leaders. And President Bola Tinubu, as chair of ECOWAS, has demonstrated good leadership by coming out very quickly to release a statement. Now, when it comes to response to coups and support for nations when under coup attempts, it is important to be able to raise sanctions or put sanctions to ensure, like, Rufai talked about, it's either by force or at least softer powers. Now, Nigeria, even though it has been said and debated that we're still the giants of Africa, we still wield huge influence on the West African corridor, particularly now that our president is the chair of ECOWAS. ECOWAS has responded, and as if in anticipation or perhaps prophetic, the president had said in his speech when he became chair of ECOWAS that they would not tolerate any kind of, that African leaders should move away from coup attempts, from coups. And so his response is in line with what he said when he took over. What can Nigeria and the African corridor do? Number one, very important is sanctions. Niger is a very small country and poverty-ridden country as well, unfortunately. But they depend on their West African corridor partners for a lot of their produce. They are largely dependent on imports and exports to their West African neighbors. So one of the key things that the ECOWAS, the AU, and neighboring countries can do is to close the borders and stop imports and exports to Niger and out of Niger. We must be able to hold them where it hurts the most, because even though they say that on the streets of Niger, there's calm, it looks like things are going on peacefully, we must protect the hard-fought and hard-won democracy that this nation has gotten, because it does have far-reaching implications for other African nations. What is to say that other countries who would not follow in the footsteps of Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger Republic on the African continent? Again, it gives us an opportunity to discuss, what does democracy look like in Africa? Is it working? Should we review it and perhaps look for a government that is better suited to our reality? Moving on to the next story. Labour unions have confirmed they will go ahead with planned protests next week, despite a meeting with the Presidential Council on subsidy removal. The primary focus of the meeting was to minimize the impact of the subsidy removal, which comes amid the Labour union's announcement of planned protests set to begin on Wednesday next week. The Government Council spokesperson lauded the meeting as a productive one, which will reconvene on Friday. However, Labour union representatives clarified that the meeting did not pertain to the second hike in petrol prices, specifically the increase to 617 naira per litre in parts of the country. They affirmed that dedication to proceed or decision to proceed with the planned protest as previously announced.
Well, the outcome is very brief. We met based on a 520 increase, and the committee that was set based on that, and we agreed to work to realize the objectives that was set during that moment.
Nigerians are very worried that government made promise to workers to provide palliatives, but it's taking a long time. What's the position of the labor unions on this?
The two centers have made their position known, and is before Nigerians. The TUC, the NLC, our position is known and is public knowledge.
Rufai, your take on this, Labour to proceed with planned protest?
I don't know what the government is begging for. I don't know what time they need. This is what happens when the government does not plan, does not have strategic planning. You announced that subsidy is gone May 29, 60 days after you don't have a coherent plan around it. This meeting, Ayo, is even a shocking meeting, because the first meeting started about 8 weeks ago, right? Or 6 weeks ago, when they said they should give them 8 weeks. Since then, they didn't meet until now that Labour was saying they were going to go on strike. The first time Labour said they were going to go on strike, and as we know, we know that the resident doctors are on strike, NERD is on strike as we speak today. So, and the hospital system is grounded. And when Labour first said they were going to go on strike, the government went to buy time by going to the industrial court, so you can't go on strike. I thought they would have bought enough time. So how much time do they need? I don't like to go back to 2012, but it saddens my heart. Because even in 2012, the President Jonathan, a lot of people excoriated, at least had a plan when he removed subsidy. He set up Shaw P to be headed by Dr. Christopher Collade. But obviously, going to 60 days after, there's no plan. So I don't know, but let me talk solutions. Couple of solutions. I believe that if the government can at least put a roadmap down as we speak today before the 2nd of August, maybe Labour can look at it anew. That roadmap will also involve, setting up your team. When are the ministers going to come out? And probably the people, the special advisors you have in the cabinet already, can they even have at least a roadmap to success that can be reviewed with both teams? So if we have something concrete, I think Labour can take a look at that. But what Labour is calling for is even a reversal, which is another case scenario, which will be a hard one. So we're set up for a showdown. We don't need that because as we speak today, the economy is already on its knees. With the devaluation of the Naira, I think Reuters was saying yesterday that the Nigerian GDP is just a little over 255 billion. We're now third on the African continent. Coupled with that, there's low productivity. Look at the roads. A lot of companies are firing people. Those that can increase salaries are literally firing people. You can see the process by contract workers for some banks. So a lot is going on as we speak today. It's an all-time low, and a strike will further compound it. I get that. But also the government must be able to show a coherent plan on ground. So today is 27th, probably before Friday, if we can put out a paper on this, a transition plan or something that Labour can look up to and talk to Labour more, and probably. But the 2nd of August, Labour said they're going to start, or will the government go to court again to be able to stall the industrial action? Time will tell. But the government has not shown critical thinking in all of this. And this was also alluded to by a professor of strategy, Professor Anthony Killer.
Okay, this is what Labour is saying. Labour is saying that 2 meetings have been held with the federal government and that government acted in bad faith by going to court to get an injunction against Labour, after also having promised that it was going to set up a steering committee that will include all the stakeholders to look at the issues. Labour, organized Labour, had made specific demands about reversal to the status quo antebellum, about education, about minimum wage being increased, about CNG being introduced, an alternative to petrol, and all those demands were tabled before government. But yesterday, the leadership of Labour was saying, look, government has not done anything along the lines of its own promise. One, the meeting yesterday was between organized Labour and the secretariat of the steering committee. But at the end of the day, they could not reach any agreement. On the basis of this, therefore, both the TUC and the NLC, represented by Joe Ajero, TUC, represented by Festus Osifo, have both now said, well, the deadline has passed. By August 2, they will call out the truce. The only difference is if by Friday, government meets them with concrete plans about what it wants to do. However, Oluvejehem, who spoke on behalf of government, says, look, there are plans in place. They just need to dot the I's and cross the T's. But they say, organized Labour leaders say they have not seen that evidence yet. So yesterday, NLC now issued a communique mobilizing all its groups, affiliates, civil society groups, and putting them on notice that a protest will start on August the 2nd. At the same time, the National Association of Resident Doctors, who had given the federal government an ultimatum since July 25, have now gone on a strike that they say, according to Emeka Oji, the president of the NARD, will be total and indefinite. What are they asking for? They are talking about unmet demands, hazard allowance, salary arrears, MNTF that had not been honored, and all kinds of requests that they had made about comments that had not been met. They have a list of those demands. But what has happened in the case of NARD is that it looks like government ignored them, just as government appears to have ignored organized Labour. However, in the face of all of this, Honorable Tajuddin Abbas, Speaker of the House of Representatives, on behalf of the President, appealed to the resident doctors and appealed to even Labour to please give the President more time, that the government is still just trying to settle down, and that with time, government will address all of this, which then raises the fundamental question. If government was aware that it was just coming in, why not plan first before introducing the policy? Asking for more time. How much time does government need? How much longer will it take before government would act expeditiously? The counter to that, however, is that we have already seen some efforts in some states. After all, in Ogun State, Edo State, Bayelsa State, Oyo State, Kwara State, the governors of those states have already said, look, we are introducing this at the state level. And the states are also important in this matter because they are the level closest to the people. If they don't move quickly, they will probably be the ones to bear the major brunt of it. But it's important for us to see that government listens and that saying we need more time is a bit nebulous. How much time does government need when the people are suffering and you have a Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria where the lawmakers are making jest of poor Nigerians? Say the poor say they want to breed. Should they breed? Those who say A, say A. Those who say nay, say A. The A's have it. This thing is not a joke. This is a serious matter. And we hope that government will proceed with greater urgency so that we do not have a situation whereby there will be crisis. It's too early in the day with the administration.
Well, the NLC have come out following that meeting yesterday and have said that August 2 remains and they will go ahead with protests if, before the 2nd of August, the government does not make efforts, tangible efforts to ameliorate the sufferings of Nigerians. The government, on the other hand, has a different perspective. What they're saying is, well, things are progressing. The essay to the president on energy had said it looked like things were progressing following the talks and that hopefully what they were appealing to the NLC and perhaps also to Nigerians is to give the Tinubu government a bit more time, as they didn't want, the reason being that they didn't want their plans to, or the implementation of their plans to be faulty, or perhaps they wanted to produce a full, a fail-proof plan. Now, whilst this sounds good, because a number of times what we've criticized is policy implementation, not just policy, the implementation of policy. And one of the things that we have talked about is that whilst this is good, it is important to also note that we're talking about human beings here. So whilst they are taking time to ensure that their policies are fail-proof and they're able to implement, efficiently, Nigerians are still suffering. We're still, Nigerians are still having to pay premium, at least 568 naira, in some parts 617 naira for PMS. Nigerians are still having to deal with inflationary pressures on food inflation. Nigerians are having to still deal with contemplating with the hike in school fees prices, even though they say that there would be a review on that decision. But Nigerians are still suffering. So in between, when they're making when they're having these conversations, analyzing these policies, ensuring that it is fail-safe, we must still have a short-term plan for Nigerians. And I believe that this is the agitation of not just the NLC. Pengassan have also said they'll come out with a decision today. The TUC have also said they're giving a two-week ultimatum. NARD, resident doctors, are also saying that they've downed their tools. How will this nation run? It is difficult to imagine what next week would look like if the government does not provide at least a working solution before they come up with a more permanent or perhaps more definite solution with regards to the amelioration of hardship on the poorest of the poor. This is very important. We need some form of palliative, some form of decision, at least before the end of this week. It's not just for the Nigerian Labour Congress, but for all Nigerians as well.